All right, here he is, the man, the myth, the legend. Some call him DJ Dan. I'll always call him the conductor. Our very own Dan Plesac. My buddy from a long time ago, and he still gives us time. He always remembers us. And Dan, first of all, thanks for coming on. I saw you and Sierra Santos co-hosting at MLB Network, and I tweeted out, I said, I used to park their cars. I knew them when I used to park their cars, but it's not true, Dan. What I really used to do was order your Chinese food.
God, isn't it you, Choi? Remember that? Vegetable fried rice, two vegetable fried rice. I would get stuff all over the floor. I would eat peanuts and they would be on the floor. And yeah, boy, those were the days. And to this day, Luke, I still get mail at MLB Network from Cub fans. That was probably the most fun I've ever had. We were lucky the last couple of years. They were really good, man. Aramis Ramirez and DeRosa and Zambrano, they were colorful. They were fun. The Go Cubs Go thing just started after the game, singing that song. And that was a lot of fun. I mean, I think back now, like this is my 17th year at MLB. Wow. It's like, where does time go? And it seems like if you had asked me, I've been here like 4 years and I still feel part of, that whole Chicago thing. Like, listen, I'm out here on the East Coast, but there's always a part of me that's Midwest, that's Chicago, everything Cubs, Bulls, Blackhawks, you name it, White Sox. I mean, it's just, I am what I am. And, but we had a lot of fun. And I will tell you this, Sierra's been there a few years now, and we did an MLB Tonight. She's gotten so good, Luke. I mean, She knows the verbiage, very composed. Man, I felt like I was working with Luke from the old days where, man, you just pointed me and shoot. Like, you handled the rundown, you did the blocks, and you're like, bang. You would just point me and tell me what to do. She's really good, and she does a lot of things. She does baseball. They have her doing stuff on the NHL network. She's kind of a jack of all trades, and I'm telling you what, she's getting really good at all of them too, Luke.
Yeah, you guys are big shots. That's the bottom line. You're big shots, and everybody's happy to see the success out there. Okay, let's talk a little Cubs baseball. I have some questions. First of all, last year we spent all this time on the CHGO Cubs podcast saying they have good players. There are good players on the roster, but they have no superstar. They have no superstar in the lineup that anybody says we have to pitch around this guy in the series. That player is not going to beat us. Well, they didn't go get Juan Soto like I wanted. And a couple years ago, they didn't go get Aaron Judge like I wanted. But they did go get Kyle Tucker in a trade. Now, it might be for 1 year, but Dan, what difference could Kyle Tucker make in this Cubs lineup this year?
All the difference in the world. I mean, you look at all different metrics, and I buy into some of it. I buy into a lot of it. And you have to when you're looking at players today, like WAR and user rating, defensive runs, and all that stuff. You could look at a myriad of things that tell you a guy's a good player or a bad player. But I do know this. I had a really long conversation playing golf about a month ago with Mark DeRosa, and he managed him on the World Baseball Classic team. And he just said he's a guy that doesn't get a whole lot of attention because that was a team filled of superstars. And with the Astros, when you've got Yordan Alvarez, you had, Altuve, you've got so many big names that he kind of quietly just kind of he to me with the Astros was what Ryne Sandberg was to the Cubs. Like Ryne Sandberg, everyone in the Chicago area knew how great he was, but he really didn't get the recognition till the home run games against the Cardinals when he took Bruce Sutter deep twice on national TV that America was like, wow, this guy's a good player. Kyle Tucker's the real thing, man. He can defend, he can throw, he runs the bases well, a lot of pop. He has good power to the opposite field. So days when the wind there is blowing in a little bit from right and out to left, he can hit the ball in the seats out in left field. I'd be very surprised, Luke, if he doesn't have a 30-plus, 100-plus RBI, and the average will be up there too. He's not one of these 30 home run, 110 RBI guys that's going to hit 235. Like he's going to hit 275, 280. When he's playing well, he handles left-handed pitching. They've allowed him to get over that hump in a day and age where you're already pigeonholed into, well, you're looking at matchups all the time. He's a guy you're going to run out there. And I expect him to have a big year. My fear is, you see this a lot now. These contracts are crazy.
Yeah.
You look at what Bregman knocked out $40 million a year for 3 years with the Red Sox. I hope the Cubs can lock him up because guys like Tucker, there aren't a lot of them out there. I hope his experience is good. I know that the people in Chicago, the Cub fans, are going to love having him there. He's not really, from a media standpoint, a way outgoing, crazy, nutty guy. I mean, guys, love him on the team. I talked to him in Houston. All the guys like him. He's not going to be maybe the greatest soundbite after a game every day, but he's a real good player, Luke. And I'm crossing my fingers that he enjoys the experience early on. They're playing well, and he decides to stay because he's the kind of guy that he's at that right age right now that he's got 5 to 8 really good, like marquee, big time years. He's just starting to figure out what he is.
So Dan, that's the question everybody wants to know. Like, we're excited that he's here, but is it a one and done, right? What's the national impression? Like at MLB Network, you guys are sitting around or you're out on the golf course with somebody. What's the national impression of the Cubs? Because here there's a segment of fans that are saying, yeah, you're outspending the rest of the division, but you're not spending enough to be the Chicago Cubs. Ken Rosenthal's been very critical of the Cubs not getting the Bregman deal done, not going and getting the extra guy to go with Tucker. And do you think that's fair? Do you believe that the Cubs should be spending more than maybe they are right now in order to really compete with the Dodgers, the Mets, the Braves, and the other teams that they're going to have to really compete with?
I will say this. No, until they acquired Presley. He's going to be a big help at the back end of the bullpen. Listen, we can debate the lineup, the rotation. If Imanaga is what he was last year, Tyone bounces back, and he's shown flashes of being a really good, dependable, reliable starter. Let's just say that the bullpen, the starting rotation holds its end up. And if you look the last 2 seasons, the bullpen has let them down. And it's not because it's been a kind of an overworked bullpen. They haven't had a lot of choices, and they're looking for that one guy, to man that thing down and hold it down. And I'm thinking Presley's going to be that guy. He's pitched in big situations. He's pitched in the postseason with the Astros quite a bit. I don't think he's going to be shocked like going to a market like Chicago. And, it's going to be imperative that he gets off to a good start like anybody going to a new team. I think, Luke, if the bullpen is good, doesn't have to be great. If the bullpen is good, I think this division is going to come down to the Cubs and the Reds. I don't know how. Yeah, I don't know how the Brewers are going to do without Willie Adames. I know they seem to think. I like the move, them signing Quintana yesterday. That was a big move for the Brewers. But I'm just buying the Cubs and the Reds. If I'm a Cub fan right now, I'm a little more worried about the Reds than I am the Brewers. You've got the Terry Francona factor. You've got some upgrades to the pitching staff that the Reds have done. They're going to have McClain back in the lineup, who was on the IL last year, a really good player. That's the team that scares me. I think the 3 teams, the Pirates will probably be in it early in April and May because of that pitching.
Yeah.
But I just don't think they can hit enough when the season starts to keep that really good, solid pitching in order. I think it's going to come down to the Cubs and the Reds. And I think whatever team holds up the best health-wise will end up winning the Central.
You mentioned Presley and what a difference. Obviously the bullpen was a massive problem. They had like 26 blown saves last year. Presley is 36. You have Brazier, who's also, past his prime for sure. You have Eli Morgan that's been added. So they added these veteran guys. What's the hardest part? You spent 18 years in the big leagues, so you found a way to extend your career and still be successful even after you hit 30 years old, right? So
right.
What's the most critical thing for these guys to do? How can they stay the Presley of old this season for the Cubs? How do you extend your career once you hit 30 and you're a guy in the bullpen?
The 5 guys in the starting rotation, Luke. You have to have good starters so that you don't have to go to your go-to guys all the time in April and May. You paid the price for it in August and September. And you look at all the teams last year. I thought the Phillies were the one team that could beat the Dodgers. Their bullpen held up for most of the year. And when they needed it most, game one of that series against the Mets, they had two guys that were on the All-Star team, and they hand over a lead, and all of a sudden that lead evaporated, and the Phillies that looked like they were bulletproof, all of a sudden, oh my God, here it goes, rearing its head again. The best defense for a good bullpen is a good starting rotation that eats up innings, because all of those outings in April and May, you come out of spring training, everybody feels good. You're not sore yet. Your body's bouncing back. The manager's not going to, you're playing your cold weather. You get a guy up one or two times. You maybe not want to use him the next day. But if you have to go to one or two guys in April and May, and you lean on those guys all season long, you pay the price for it in July and August. I will say this. If the Cubs rotation does what they expect it to do, you'll have a good bullpen. You show me a good starting rotation, I'll show you a good bullpen. You show me a starting rotation that doesn't cover enough innings, I'll show you a good bullpen for 4 months that turns out to be an overworked, and then it's easy to throw darts at that bullpen when you're like, my God, he was so good in July. What happened to him? He can't pitch down the stretch most of the time. And you look what happened in the postseason, the Yankee series against the Guardians, their bullpen was locked down. Clase was tired. Cade Smith was tired. Luke Weaver was tired. Blake Trinan was tired. And all of a sudden, these guys that looked so good were like, okay, we'll take a deep breath. We got the lead. All of a sudden, boom, boom, boom. You're like, uh-oh, where do we go now? And then when those marquee guys, those guys you count on, aren't doing the job, then you've got to go to somebody that's pitched the 6th and the 7th, and now you're asking him to pitch the 9th, and you don't have any insurance to cover the 5th and 6th because you've taken that guy that's gotten big outs for you in the 5th and 6th, but you've got to hang on to him because the other guys aren't pitching well, and then you lose a game in the 6th and 7th because you took a strength and you moved it away. So show me a good starting rotation. I'll show you a good bullpen.
But Dan, here's the problem. Nobody's throwing 200 innings anymore. It almost rarely happens in Major League Baseball. Like the list is like a handful of guys this year. So do you think it's harder to be that veteran reliever now than maybe it was even when you were pitching?
Yes.
Because they're relied on so much more because the starters are only going 4 or 5, 2 times through the rotation, 2 times through the lineup, and guys don't want to see him a third time. Is it harder now than it used to be?
Yes, it's harder now, and especially in the day and age that we're living in now with baseball, it's grip it, rip it, and let it fly. You very rarely see guys out of the bullpen that are sinker slider. Everyone's chasing the same 2 things. They're chasing velo, they're chasing spin rate. And when you chase those 2 things, something eventually has to give. And normally it's your health, and you start spraying the ball, you start being inconsistent in the strike zone. And listen, I get it. The metrics, the numbers, the data, all the stuff, it comes into play. But teams are asking these guys, and it starts with the starters. Hey, give us all you have, empty out the tank, and we'll figure out innings 6 through 9. Well, when you do that, and you do that in April and May, and then it's easy to start picking apart your bullpen, but that bullpen that's worked hard, that's been overworked. I feel like this, man. As a manager, the toughest thing to do managing a game is you map out before a game, hey, these are the matchups. These are the guys in the bullpen. You look at, say you're playing the Phillies, and you want to make sure that you save one good lefty in case you have to go through Harper, you have to go through Schwarber, and you have to go through Stott. So you really don't want to use that ace of spade in the 7th if you can hold him off to the 8th, or maybe you might need him in the 9th. And I think the managers that do it the best are the guys that you have to resist the temptation to keep going to the well to the guys that are doing it. And it's hard to do that you sacrifice a game or 2 in April and May for the well-being of the bullpen and the guy's health in August and September. But sometimes you have to do it. But as a fan and as an analyst, I look at it, I'm like, man, get somebody up. What are you doing? Like, this is starting to spin out of control. but I'm not following that team every day and knowing that that guy pitched 2 out of 3 days. And the day that he didn't pitch, he was up twice. So basically, he's pitched 3 days in a row. You got to give that guy a blow. You got to give him a breather. And that's why I think it's going to be important. And Craig Counsell likes to use that bullpen. I mean, when he was with Milwaukee, he was like, hey, we don't have designated roles. He came up with that great slogan. We have outgetters. And you better be, you might be in the 6th on Monday, but you might pitch the 8th on Tuesday, and you might be in the 4th on Wednesday if you're playing the Dodgers and you score 4 runs early against Glasnow or Yamamoto. And man, you know what? Freeman and Betts and Ohtani are coming up in the 5th. You might have to try to win that game in the 5th and use one of your leverage guys in the 5th or 6th. You can't worry about the 8th because the damage is coming right in front of you. That's the hardest thing for a manager to do.
So the Cubs have sort of tried to go by numbers, right? Like they try to make these incremental improvements to their roster. Maybe Colin Ray can have a better season than Kyle Hendricks, or maybe it's Boyd has a slightly better season than Kyle Hendricks. But they've got a lot of guys that can sort of do both, right? Like Javier Assad, when healthy, can start or he could be a reliever. Ben Brown could be a starter. We don't know this year, or he could be a reliever. Colin Ray could start or he could be a reliever. Jordan Wicks could start or be a reliever. What's the hardest part about that role? Specifically like Assad and those guys. Like, what's the hardest part of walking that fine line between being a starter but also being ready to be a key piece of the bullpen if you're needed?
First of all, you have to accept that role. And it's a hard thing to accept that one day, listen, everybody has their opinions on things. I think the best 2 jobs in the pitching department in baseball are a starting pitcher. You know what your routine is. So if you're having a little trouble, with your breaking ball or your arm side fastball, you can work on it on the side. The other guy that gets special treatment is the 9th inning guy. Very rarely do you get those guys up twice and not get them in. The call goes down, Presley gets up, boom. Unless it's a 3-run lead in the 8th inning, you add on and score 5 runs, sit them down, hey, don't get hot, let's play it by ear. If we score a run or 2, and then you can tell. And to me, the hardest part is your body gets adjusted to, okay, I'm starting. And then all of a sudden, now you turn into this, it's like a fire alarm, man. All of a sudden, you're sitting in that bullpen and that phone rings, and all of a sudden, it's get up, get hot, get in there fast. The biggest issue that I found is when you're struggling in the bullpen, it's hard to straighten it out because of this. You only have so many bullets. And let's just say you're struggling on Monday, you pitch 2 days in a row, and on Tuesday, you really want to work on your breaking ball a little bit. You want to go on the side and you want to throw before the game and you just want to spin a few to get that feel back. You got to be really careful that you don't spend too much time doing that because you might pitch 3 hours later. If you're trying to work on something and you're a starter, and say if you're Glasnow and you're having trouble like with a curveball, he could take a day off after he pitches, play catch, and then on the 3rd day, go down with the pitching coach and say, hey, I want to work today, not mechanics. I just want to work. I want to get that feel of the breaking ball back. And you do it without worrying you're not going to pitch 3 hours later. So you can throw, if you want, it's 8 minutes, it's 12 minutes, it's 15. However your arm feels, you can work on it. You can't do that in the bullpen because as soon as you have a day where you haven't pitched in 2 days and you're like, man, you know what? I want to have a good side session. And you throw and you're working on something. You're like, boy, that felt really good. And the pitching bullpen coach is like, hey, save it. And inevitably what happens the next day, the starter's out in the 3rd inning. You're like, oh, shit, we've got to cover 5 innings. I'm not going to go 1 inning today. I might have to go 2. And I might have left it in the bullpen yesterday working on that breaking ball. So it's hard. It's hard to right the ship in the bullpen when you're a high leverage guy because you don't want to waste them during the day because you're going to need them at night.
All right, before we cut you loose, I do want to ask you, I want to go all the way back to the beginning of this interview and we talked about the star player, right? Kyle, let me give you these names. Kyle Tucker, Shota Imanaga, Justin Steele, Matt Shaw, the rookie potentially playing a lot of third base. Could the Cubs this season have either an MVP, a Cy Young, or a Rookie of the Year?
Very easily, yes. I was blown away how Imanaga took to lifestyle and pitching at the big league level. The concern with him was, didn't have as much swing and miss as Yamamoto, Yu Darvish, Hideo Nomo, the guys that have come from Japan that have had 5 pitches and they throw 100. Was he going to keep the ball in the ballpark, fly ball kind of pitcher? I mean, he's the real thing. And he had a little spurt there, post All-Star break. You're like, and then, man, he finished guns a-blazing. I think the key to the Cubs, I'm a huge Steele fan. I just am. I like everything about him. He's no nonsense. He's no BS. He wears his emotions on his sleeve. He gets after it. He's added a couple of pitches there. For a while, he was basically fastball slider. He's mixing the changeup, changing speeds, almost like a slurve, a little curveball that he's using. I watched him pitch the other day in the Cactus League. I liked what I saw. His body looks good. I think the key to the Cubs this year, if Steele stays healthy, he's going to give them a 1-2 punch with Imanaga. And I do think this, if this is one of those summers that it gets warm in May and the wind's blowing out, Kyle Tucker could hit 40 home runs. And he's playing for the right team because the Cubs get a lot of national attention. And if he has one of those years we hit 40 and 125, you're always got to worry about Ohtani. I mean, it's almost like he's already got the 2025. They've already started like engraving his first name, into the trophy again. But you could definitely make the case. Yes. And that's not like a far stretch. I mean, it'd be harder to win the MVP because of Ohtani, Betts, and Freeman.
Yeah.
But you could make a case, yes. Yeah, very, very much. It's not far-fetched.
All right, real quick then, because you mentioned them, can anybody beat the Dodgers?
Yes. On paper right now, I think there's one team, if they played them in a 7-game series, that I would be like, hey, they can Philadelphia Phillies. I'm Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, Christopher Sanchez, Ranger Suarez. They acquired Luzardo from the Marlins with the Phillies. It's not about the lineup. It's not about the starting pitching. Is Romano going to handle that 9th inning? And Strom's a good lefty. It's going to be about the bullpen. And if the Phillies bullpen is good, I think on paper that's the one team right now that I think could beat the Dodgers. I'm not saying they will. Mm-hmm. Luke, I try to be honest and I try to be open and objective. The Dodgers just do everything right now. They have an embarrassment of riches where they can spend. And not only do they spend, they develop, they draft, and people want to go there, Luke. Players want to go there. They've created a culture that guys like it there, man. There was a time in Boston and New York, like, do you want to put up with the aggravation of that media? And, there's always something brewing with the Red Sox and the Yankees. There's always something off the field that creates some kind of controversy. And in LA, it's the Hollywood thing. But I'm going to tell you something. Dave Roberts and that ownership group, listen, it's easy for a fan to go, yeah, they spend $300 million. They go get everybody. But you know what they do, Luke? They put their money where their mouth is. They spend. Their fan base expects a lot. And you know what? They want to win. They want to win the whole thing. They don't want to win the West. And I'll say this, last year, that team last year showed me more because going into game 4, they were done. Like the Padres had them buried. Like, the stepchild that's been saying we're going to knock you down. We got you. They had them and they didn't step on their neck. And I was not surprised that they beat the Yankees. I was surprised they did it in 4. That Dodger team, when you have Freeman and Mookie Betts, man, those are special players, Luke. Those guys are gritty. They play every day. They're good. They're flashy. They're Hollywood. But I'm going to tell you something. There's some backbone in L.A., and it's a real thing, Luke. They're good.
We all silly like the mayor.